talk about something real today. Making changes in your 50s. Because if you're anything like me, you hit this age and life taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, you still there? Your 50s are weird. You're old enough to know better, young enough to still do something about it, and tired enough to not want to do any of it. But here we are, you know. First off, just admit things change. Your body changes, your priorities change, your tolerance for bullshit changes. And honestly, that's not a bad thing. Some mornings you wake up and think, damn, my back hurts, but I didn't even use it yesterday. Other days you're like, is this really it? Is this my life? Is this what I want to do for the next 20 years? And that, my friends, is the question, the one that got me moving. When you're 20, change is exciting. When you're 30s, change is strategic. When you're 40s, change is a pain in the ass, inconvenient. But in your 50s, it feels personal. You're kind of testing yourself again at that point. It's not about impressing anybody. It's not about chasing some big life dream. It's about reclaiming yourself and who you are. Your health, your time, your peace, your identity. For me, the moment hit when I realized I was living on autopilot. I was just doing what I had been doing for years. Same routines, same habits, same excuses. You ever have that moment where you look in the mirror and you think, all right, something's got to give, not in a dramatic way, just a quiet, honest, yeah, this ain't it, man. That's the moment change starts. Here's the thing, change in your 50s doesn't have to be huge. You don't need to sell everything and travel a country or move to a different country. You don't need to run a marathon. You don't need to reinvent your entire life. You know, Sometimes change is walking 20 minutes a day. Sometimes it's cutting out toxic people out of your life. Sometimes it's starting over financially, which is a hard thing. You know, Leaving a job that's just sucking your soul out. You know, Small changes stack up and they matter. Let's be honest. Change at this age is scary. You're not 25. You've got responsibilities and bills, maybe kids, you know, maybe aging mom and dad if they're still there, maybe a divorce, maybe a career that doesn't fit anymore, and the fear is real. Like, will I fail? What if it's too late? What if I look too stupid? What if I'm too old? But here's the truth. You survived everything that life has thrown in your way, and you're still here, so that's pretty good. You're not starting from scratch. You're starting from experience on how to do things, so that should be an advantage. You know, and when you do make the changes, even the small ones, something shifts in there. You feel lighter, you feel more in control, more like your old self again. You realize you're not done. You're not stuck. You're not too old. You're just getting started on a different chapter of your life. Say if you're in your 50s and you feel that itch to change, that pull, that quiet voice saying, hey, it's time. Let's do this. Make the change, man. Any change. Start small, start a mess, start scared, just start. changing, for the better, because you just still got life left. You just want to make yourself better. But, all right, guys, that's it for today. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think. Deuces.